Hello, welcome back everyone. I'm Kelly Moore with Missoula County Extension and MSU Extension. So happy to be with you today. Thanks for joining. Today we're going to talk about actually two things that will work together, you'll see. We are going to talk about pressure canning, which is a good thing to do in wintertime. And we are going to talk about chicken soup. So we'll be able to put those two things together. So today we brought our pressure canner in for reasons I'll explain in a little while. We'll go through explaining the process, but we won't actually set the pressure canner up to be working today. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. So when we talk about chicken soup, everybody has a great feeling about that. Kind of brings back a memory maybe of growing up when you had chicken soup, even if it came out of a can and it was a Campbell's chicken noodle. Somehow eating that just made you feel a little bit more comfortable. A lot of us had it when we were sick, so maybe your mom or dad opened up the can and that's what you ate. So I just want to try to convince you today that making your own chicken noodle soup is not that difficult, and you're going to be surprised how good it tastes afterwards. And you will know everything that goes into it. A lot of times if you are into label reading and you read the back of a can, you might not understand all the words, and it might make you want to go back to doing things your own way to see how the taste will be, and I think you'll be really surprised. Okay, so whether it's scientifically proven or not, chicken soup is often fed to people who have colds, for one thing. It's always been something easy to get down, and just about everybody likes it. Okay? So we are going to, I have a recipe that you will be able to get off of the website, and it's just basic chicken noodle soup. Everybody's got their own way of making it for sure. And this is just kind of our way of doing it. It's pretty easy. Okay? Here are some of the ingredients we're going to be using today, or you will find in the soup. We have a little parsley, some carrots, parsnip, which you might want to put that in. It's a little bit different than your usual chicken soup recipe. Onions, celery, which is very, very important. If you have a chicken soup recipe that does not have celery in it, I would throw that out. It's just not going to be that great. Celery is very important, which is funny because celery is a little bit on the maybe less flavorful vegetable side, but it's important in this recipe. Sometimes I use this, a little rosemary. I like to use some fresh herbs, bay leaves, and I also have a little bit of poultry seasoning, which has some sage in there, I think a little ground oregano. So I buy these in bulk because I use so much of them. And then finally at the end, when I'm making chicken soup to eat right then, I will add noodles. And there's a reason why we're not going to do that today with the pressure can. I like to use these udon noodles. They cook very quickly. They're very good. So just a thought for you to consider. Salt is an important ingredient as well. All right? So chicken soup doesn't have to have a whole lot of different exotic spices. It's just all in how you cook it. If you're making chicken soup, it can be a little bit longer process. It's not something you want to hurry through. Okay? So if you don't have a lot of time, I would suggest that maybe you take a different route, especially when it comes to pressure canning too. That's a very timely process. Typically, people use a pressure canner in the summer. We have to pressure can vegetables and meats. They are low acid foods, so they have to be processed at a much higher temperature than water bath canning. In fact, if you've been water bath canning vegetables or meat, except for tomatoes, that is an exception, then that really is not the safest way to go. So if any of you have ever heard about botulism, it's not something you would ever want to go through. In fact, people in the past, quite a few people have died from botulism. So it's something you want to be really careful about. And that's where the pressure canner is going to pretty much guarantee that does not happen if you use an approved research-based recipe and if you follow the directions on your pressure canner. Okay? So we have a few slides here too that we will just go over quickly. Again, we say that the only safe way to pressure can vegetables and meats, especially because they're low acid, is with the pressure canner. Okay? And also, it's important that you know your altitude when you are pressure canning. So the altitude of Missoula is 3209, I believe. I've seen some numbers 3232. So of course, some people live up a little bit higher in the valley. Okay. So the dial gauge is very important. We'll go talk about that in a few minutes. That's going to tell you what you have to process at. Today we're going to process at 12 pounds of pressure. And we know to do that because that's what the recipe says, okay, when we're pressure canning. Okay? This again talks about how home canned foods, if they're not processed correctly, there is the fear of botulism. Okay? So the pressure canner must be used for all low acid foods. And we always recommend that you use research-based recipes. If we get a close-up of this, that gives you the website and the link so you can look on. The USDA is also another great site. You can get on that and get different recipes. Okay? So when we're using the pressure canner, we'll go with that first. Okay, and look at the parts again. This is an American pressure canner. I like it the best. I mean, it tends to be a little more expensive, but it's very solid. It's stainless steel, very heavy duty, and this will probably last past my lifetime for sure. They tend to be a little more expensive, but if you're going to can a lot, it's worth it. I'm not sure if these are available just for purchase off the shelf in Missoula. You probably have to order them. And this is a good time of year to start ordering this stuff. Last summer, we had kind of a shortage with a lot of canning items. They are kind of speculating that could possibly happen again. So I suggest you go online and start looking for your supplies for sure. Okay. This pressure canner has a weighted gauge and the dial gauge. Okay. So we're going to actually use both. The dial gauge is what we're going to go with, but the weighted gauge is also kind of a good way to offer the most protection when we're pressure canning. We have this too. The difference with this pressure canner compared to a hot water bath, we don't have a rack like with the basket rack. We just have this. And the reason for that is pressure canner works with steam. The steam builds up in there at such a high pressure, and that's what causes it to reach 240 degrees, which is what a pressure canner has to reach in order to maintain that safety. And you also use a lot less water. You put it in about 2 inches of water. It does not cover the jar, okay? So the reason why, we'll get back to this, I had forgotten when we talked about doing this class that there might possibly be a glass top stove. So I tell everybody who has a glass top stove, look at your manufacturer's directions. If it says it's okay to can, then you can do that. But I never want to use a glass stove before I've checked on that. So I unfortunately didn't do that before I came today. The reason why a glass stove is a little bit less certain, they're trying to make them a little bit more suitable for canning. You have to make sure the surface area is enough to heat the entire bottom of the pan. But because we're going to process for 75 minutes, that's what the recipe calls for, and the temperature has to be very high. So it has to withstand that amount of heat for that long of a period of time. And because of the material of this canner, it maintains the heat. So sometimes in the past that's caused some glass breakage. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Again, check or call the appliance manufacturer or the store that you bought the stove at. They usually know as well. Okay. American makes lots of different sizes of canners. There's a double-decker one too that if you're really serious about canning is a good way to go. one thing about pressure canning, you want to make sure that you have plenty of time, for one thing. You've got adequate equipment, space, storage for all the jars that you're going to be processing. And it takes a lot of time to get your ingredients together. If you are someone who eats a lot of wild meat and you get that, then it would be worth your time to do the pressure canning. If you really, I've canned a lot of chicken before. If you find chicken on sale and you just want to have it available, you lack the refrigeration or freezer space, then it's a good way to go as well, because it'll last about 18 months. So that's why I say that's a good thing. And unlike a lot of our garden vegetables in summer, you can do this any time of year. So that's a good thing. It's not so hot in the wintertime too, so it's easier to do pressure canning that way. Let's see, how else do we want to do that? Usually too, when we're talking about soup, I kind of like to go with the quart jars instead of the pint jars, because this is like one serving. And who can just eat one serving of soup? So it's better if you have just a little bit bigger jar. It holds a lot more. I would always recommend using the wide mouth too. That helps a lot when you are filling your jar. And of course, I want to always kind of encourage people to get your handy canning equipment together. I just always keep this in one place. I know where it is, the jar lifter, the filler. This measures your headspace, and this is your magnet to get the lid out. So these are pretty important things to have and pretty inexpensive as well. When we get back to doing in-person classes, and we're all hoping that comes soon, I promise you we always have classes at the county extension office, and you can call there anytime and I'll let you know when those are going to start up. And we will actually, it takes about a 3-hour class. We will go from start to finish. And if you're really interested, I encourage you to do that, okay? So if we were just going to go ahead and process it this time, I would put my 2 to 3 inches of water in here, all right? I would turn the heat on, okay? And the thing is, you have to put the jars in there right away when you're doing pressure canner. When you're doing hot water bath canning, you usually wait till that water gets pretty warm. These you have to have the jars filled with the lids on and put into, because once you put this lid on, you're not going to lift it up to look in there, right? So this kind of canner, you just want to line up all the holes here all the way around, okay? And then we're going to start crosswise with the handles, all right? And then we're going to tighten them, okay? We're going to take these across, we're going to tighten. All right, and then finally, the last ones. You don't want to just go all the way around, because then it won't get sealed properly, okay? If one of the notch or the levers doesn't feel like it's going to fit in, you can unscrew it just a teeny bit and then tighten. All right, here we go. Okay, also there's no gasket like there is in a hot water bath canner, so you want to put a little bit of oil, whether it's vegetable oil, and just put it around the edges, the inside edge. You don't have to do that every time, but like every other time is good, okay? So now we'll just pretend that we've got the burner on, we've got our jars in there, we're starting to crank up the heat, okay? Now, this is the gauge we're going to watch. This is going to tell us if we're at the proper pressure. But this is important over here too. This is called a petcock. So we want to vent the pressure canner every single time. Venting means we're going to let the steam go through for 10 minutes. It's important to put that on your timer. So once that heat builds up, you're going to see the steam start rising up. So we also say if you have an area in your kitchen that you're cooking and that steam it hits the bottom side of underneath of a cabinet or something, that probably isn't the best place to do your pressure canning, because that steam is so terribly hot and will burn very easily. So we're just pretending the steam's coming up, and we've timed it for 10 minutes. At that point, we're going to put this on there, the weighted gauge. It has little notches here. There's 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds. Okay, so whatever your recipe says that you should process at, if it says 10 to 12 pounds, then we're going to stick that right in there, okay? And this is going to start rocking. A lot of pressure canners only have the rocking weighted gauge, and people have learned how to use those correctly, and then they like those, okay? But again, I'll always watch this. Once that steam's closed off, this will start building up pressure. And once it gets to about, say, 10 pounds of pressure, then we're going to possibly crank up the heat a little bit more until it gets to about 12, 13, somewhere in there. If it drops a little bit, just regulate the heat again. If it drops down farther, then you just want to turn it off and start all over again. You always have to go back to the beginning, okay? So, you don't have to stand there and watch it the whole time, but you pretty much want to set your timer for the 75 to 80 minutes, okay? Once that your timer's gone off, it's going to be really noisy too, so sometimes people are surprised how noisy it is. When the timer's gone off, you're just going to turn off your heat and you're going to leave it alone, okay? And you can go around and watch the gauge to start dropping all the way to the bottom. Okay. When it drops all the way to the bottom and no more steam's coming out, then, and only then, can you start undoing these, because then your processing will be over, okay? So you never want to force that. If you're in a hurry, don't do pressure canning. It just will not work. You got to stick with it and you got to pay attention, okay? So again, when we can actually do it in person, we will take you through every step of the way. So let's get back to the soup too. This is what has been pressure canned. Now this might not look like your typical chicken soup, because what is missing? You probably will say, I don't see any noodles in there. I don't see any whatever everybody used to put in, whether it's peas, I don't know, celery, parsley, any of that. I like to do it this way because you really don't get a very good looking soup if you put all these vegetables in there, because the celery will pretty much disintegrate, okay? I like the bright color of these. I like the flavor better if I do it separately. So if I am planning on having like chicken soup, one night I'll go to my pantry and say, okay, well, here's a good start for chicken soup. It has chicken broth, salt already in there. It has chicken and carrots. So it's whatever I do to doctor it up, okay? And if I don't want to make soup, this is a good start for a lot of other things too. A chicken pot pie, whatever, okay? So that part's good. So when I get one of those, I know that I have started with this method. So you start with the chicken, and you want to get a chicken that is a pretty good size, say about 3.5 to 4 pounds typically. There are all prices of chickens. There are organic chickens, there are chickens you buy that just store, typical store chicken. So I'd say use a really good quality chicken, because that flavor is not going to be magically, it's not going to be transformed if you don't get a good chicken to start with. Get a fresh chicken too, okay? So what I do is put that chicken in a big pot, because you want to cook it really slow. Get a pot that will take the heat, okay? That's why I like these Cuisinart kind of pots. A lot of recipes will tell you to cover the chicken with water, but I thought, why would you do that? Water has no flavor. So I cover the chicken with chicken broth, okay? You are making chicken broth, but why not add chicken broth to chicken broth? Sounds like it'll taste a whole lot better, doesn't it? Okay, so this chicken has been cooked already. This is how my chicken will look. Let's see if we can get that there. I usually put my vegetables in there then just to flavor the broth, okay? So the chicken's covered. I've got some celery, carrots, a little rosemary, bay leaf, all that. But let me grab a spoon here. This is why I don't like to go ahead and, although these vegetables taste great, I'm sure, but I want to show you the difference. Okay, so I'm going to take out a little bit of celery here, carrot, there's a little bit of rosemary. Okay, so if you just look at this celery compared to this celery here, which would you rather eat? So there's something about the way you cook. You know, and if I put that in the pot, we're going to get celery flavor, but nobody wants to eat that probably. And also the carrot doesn't look that great either. Okay, so if I were going to start to make soup from this, or that's actually how I started to make this, okay? So what I would do is just take these vegetables out. My dogs love these. They would probably get a little bit of this. Okay, now, still got a few things floating in there, but it's all good stuff. Okay, now you'll see that's kind of a golden color there, but you see some bubbles on there. That is certainly the fat, because chicken does have fat. Fat is flavor, but you can have too much of that too if you're kind of watching that. Chicken is good to make broth. Some people just use bones to make broth, which is a great thing. Chicken bones have a lot of collagen in them, so that's why you will, when you make the broth, it's just a little gelatin-like, so that's what that comes from. I would pour off the broth from this chicken, which I have done from the chicken that went in here. I always cool down the broth and then stick it in the refrigerator overnight, because look what happens. The same stuff you see up here that's made kind of a layer all the way around it is the same stuff that's sitting on top of here. So you don't want to have a greasy taste in your mouth when you're having your soup. That's why cooling off your broth is a good idea. And then what I just do is skim off the chicken fat, okay? If you want to save that to add it to something else, that's up to you. But if you were to can the chicken with this chicken fat in it like this, with the broth from here to here, there's a possibility that your jar would not seal, because that fat will cause some problems with sealing of the jar. So, plus it doesn't look too great in there because it just kind of tends to float around. And if you're really serious about it, you can even strain it through. Now you can see what I mean about that gelatin kind of look there. Okay, strain it through if you want to get all the pieces of stuff out of there and make your broth look better. Me, I'm more, I mean, appearance is very important too, but I kind of like some flavor going on too, so I'm not going to be that's terribly picky. I mean, if you wanted it just to be a certain color, you could just pour the broth right over it, but this broth has flavor. Okay, so that's how it goes in the jar. And that's why it's a little bit different color than what you would think your Campbell's chicken soup looks like, for sure. Okay, all right. So, set this out of the way here. So if you wanted to pressure can broth, you could just pressure can this as it is, okay? And just make sure you have the bubbles out of there as much as you can. Put the jar on, the lid, and look in the recipe and see how long the cooking time is for just broth. So I know a lot of people prefer to do that than have the chicken soup, okay? But what I do is clean off that chicken, take the meat all off, and there's a lot more chicken in there than what I have used, obviously, today. If you're just going for the fair canning kind of best look, a lot of people will just cut the pieces like the chicken breast, just the pieces of white meat. I prefer the taste of the dark meat, but that's why I save the dark meat for another recipe for something. So I just cut them in very small pieces. You don't want to get giant chunks. There are two ways to do pressure canning when you're doing meat or vegetables. There's a raw pack method and a hot pack. So the raw pack method would basically be cutting up pieces of raw chicken or raw meat, just putting them in the jar. You can cover them with the broth. I mean, they're going to get cooked, of course, when they're processing. Or once you put that meat in there, the juices from the meat will come through once you're doing the pressure canning, okay? That's the raw pack. We did this with a hot pack. So I cooked the chicken, like I did in the pot here. I cooked carrots. A lot of times I will pressure can and just have jars of carrots around so I could mix the two together. And so that way everything gets cooked, so it's just a matter of what your preference is. If you're canning any kind of beef, you can cook that up a little bit, season it a little bit. I always add a little salt to this. But when I can it like this, I don't add the poultry seasoning or the bay leaf in there. I like them to be fresh, and I like to add them later when I'm putting the soup together, okay? If I were to have put this in this jar, it would not be a very appealing color, I'm sure. So I like to keep it as basic as we can, okay? When I'm making the actual soup, like if it's time, let's say, oh, I want to make some chicken noodle soup. So I will take this jar, I will open it up, and back into my pot, I can add that in and kind of heat it up. But then I want to add some bright vegetables to that. So that's where I get all the other ingredients, the onion, parsnip occasionally, a leek, carrots, celery, and or possibly rosemary, okay? I stir all those together in a little bit of oil, and it still maintains the bright colors, okay? So if we were just to pretend we're putting these ingredients together in a soup, like we've just opened that jar, and let's see, we're gonna use this right here. Then we're gonna add the other ingredients to make the soup. Okay, and really does not take long to saute a few vegetables, plus you get that nice smell in your house, right? So I'm gonna just put these in a bowl. I did add a few carrots in here as well because they are very bright carrots. Once you process the carrots, they're not quite the same nice color. All right. All right. Now, and we also have this already made. I'm not going to open these yet because since we just, they are canned, they're good to go for the next year and a half. So I'm just going to leave these if that's okay. Okay. But this is the same chicken I used before. So I'm going to mix that in there. Then we have our broth. Okay. So this will have flavor because it's cooked in this chicken. Okay. And of course we would put this in a pan to heat it up. All right. You can also add a little bit of extra chicken broth there if you want. All right. And then you can add your spices. But let's see, let's put a little parsley in there. We need to do that. I'd always recommend too to always keep your herbs fresh. Usually after about a year, they don't have a whole lot of flavor to them. So that's the difference. And the worst thing is to make something where you want a lot of flavor and you taste it and you think, wow, I don't taste that at all. So I'm just going to chop up a little bit of parsley here for a little extra color. And basically add a little salt and pepper, poultry seasoning. You want to brown that poultry seasoning with the vegetables, okay? Let it simmer for, say about half hour on very low heat, okay? That's a mistake that we make a lot of times. We cook things way too high of a heat. In fact, when you are cooking your chicken in this pot, and I would suggest you put on some of the lowest heat you can find. You just want to barely see it bubbling, okay? That way it won't be as tough. Okay. Add a little bit of parsley here. Okay. All right. And I always, and then if I add these noodles too, these Japanese noodles are cooked very quickly. You don't have to worry about them being gummy. You put them in at the very end. Oftentimes I'll turn the heat off altogether and just break the noodles, stick it in there, and then 5 minutes later it's ready to go. I don't know if I said this before. The reason why when you're canning chicken soup, you do not want to put rice noodles. I've seen things on YouTube, cream of chicken soup. You cannot use milk, cream at this stage. That's just not safe. The heat can't penetrate some of your noodles adequately, and you just can't be guaranteed it's going to be a safe product. So there are lots of recipes out there. Just be sure you're using a research-based one. And that's why you can always add other things later, okay? So if we were to have noodles in there, but actually this is a good start now. Of course, like we said, we need to cook this a little bit, but this is a lot more appealing looking soup because you've added a lot of bright colors, a lot of fresh things, okay? If you were just to put everything in here, you get a good flavor soup, but it's just not going to be as appealing for sure. Okay, you want to try to use as many fresh ingredients as you can. All right. So that's pretty much kind of a quick overview of how easy it is to make soup, both if you're making it for yourself for the night or if you want to do some pressure canning. Okay, so again, you say make sure this time of year your equipment's good, in good working order. Make sure you can find jars. Lids have been hard to find. Make sure your canner gauge is reading correctly. If you bring the lid or just even the gauge to the county extension office, I have a tester that I can put this on. And if it shows it's not holding pressure, then it needs to be tossed out. And you can just buy a new one at that point. So it's a good time of year to do that, and instead of waiting until it is canning season. Okay? I can also tell you if your gasket needs to be replaced, or in this case there is no gasket. So that's a good time to make sure everything's working well. That's probably what we're going to talk about today. So hopefully I will see you soon, and hopefully in person. All right, we'll keep our fingers crossed. So until next time, thanks for watching.